Vape. Vapes deliver nicotine through a small battery-powered device that heats liquid into vapor instead of burning tobacco, which is part of why they spread so fast among people who never would have picked up a cigarette. Most pods and disposables now use nicotine salts rather than the free-base nicotine found in older e-liquids. That shift matters more than it sounds. Salt-based nicotine absorbs faster and at higher concentrations while feeling smoother on the throat, so users pull in more nicotine per puff without the usual harshness warning them to stop. Once inhaled, nicotine binds to receptors in the brain and triggers a fast release of dopamine alongside a stimulant effect that sharpens focus. The onset is almost instant, a light head rush within seconds followed by a wave of calm alertness that smooths out restlessness. At the peak, the mind feels clear and stress seems to dissolve. That peak burns off quickly, though, and the comedown brings irritability that pulls the hand right back to the device. Because nic salts deliver nicotine so efficiently, dependence can build faster than with cigarettes, especially in younger users whose brains are still developing. Marketed as the safer choice, vaping has quietly become a faster route to the same addiction for a lot of people. Dextromethorphan. DXM is a dissociative hiding in plain sight in nearly every pharmacy, sold as cough syrup. It was approved decades ago as a safer replacement for codeine, and for most people, it just quiets a cough. At high doses, it becomes something else entirely. The liver breaks DXM down into a metabolite called dextrorphin, and that's the chemical responsible for what follows. Dextrorphin blocks NMDA receptors, the same receptors targeted by ketamine, which is why users sometimes call this the poor man's version of that drug. The onset is slow, a loose stimulation that feels like caffeine wrapped in fog. As the dose climbs, that fog thickens into the peak. Vision smears at the edges, walking feels like wading through water, and thoughts loop back on themselves until the line between body and mind blurs. At the highest doses, users report watching themselves from outside their own body. The comedown is heavy, leaving grogginess that can stretch into the next day. DXM isn't physically addictive the way opioids are, but tolerance can become permanent with heavy use, and many formulations are mixed with acetaminophen, meaning chasing the high quietly pushes the liver toward failure. GHB. GHB is a depressant that occurs naturally in the body in tiny amounts, which is part of why it slipped under the radar before becoming a club drug. It's swallowed as a clear liquid, measured in capfuls, because the gap between a dose and an overdose is razor thin. GHB acts on GABA receptors, the same calming system targeted by alcohol and benzodiazepines, slowing brain activity across the board. The onset arrives within 15 minutes. Relaxation spreads, inhibitions soften, and a loose social euphoria takes over. At the peak, users feel uninhibited and affectionate, which is part of why it earned a reputation on the club scene. But that peak sits dangerously close to unconsciousness. A slightly larger dose, or mixing with alcohol, can tip someone from euphoric straight into a coma. The comedown brings drowsiness and foggy detachment for hours. Tolerance builds fast, and withdrawal from dependence can bring tremors, anxiety, and seizures. GHB is also one of the drugs most linked to drink spiking since it's odorless and erases memory at higher doses. It doesn't just lower your guard, it can take your control away entirely. PCP. PCP, or angel dust, is a dissociative anesthetic originally developed for surgery before doctors abandoned it over how badly patients reacted while coming out of it. It's smoked, snorted, or swallowed, often sprayed onto leafy material. Like ketamine, PCP blocks NMDA receptors, but binds more strongly and lasts much longer, which makes it unpredictable. The onset brings numbness and detachment, sometimes paired with a strange sense of power. At the peak, users can become disconnected from pain entirely, and perception twists heavily, distorting time, sound, and the sense of one's own body. Some users go catatonic and silent. Others turn agitated or aggressive, with no reliable way to predict which direction a dose will take someone. The come-down can stretch across hours, blending into confusion or paranoia that returns days, later as flashbacks. PCP is addictive both physically and psychologically, and chronic use can leave behind memory problems, speech difficulties, and persistent anxiety. Where most dissociatives offer an escape, PCP offers something closer to a hijacking. Inhalants. Inhalants cover household chemicals like aerosol sprays, glue, and paint thinner, none designed to be breathed in for a high. They're inhaled directly or soaked into a rag, sending solvent vapors into the bloodstream within seconds. These chemicals depress the nervous system in a way chemically similar to alcohol, but far more abrupt. The onset is almost immediate, a wave of lightheadedness that resembles drunkenness compressed into seconds. At the peak, users experience slurred speech, double vision, and a dreamlike detachment, sometimes with brief hallucinations. The high lasts only minutes, which drives repeated inhaling in a single session to keep the feeling going. That repetition is where the danger lives. Inhalants can trigger sudden sniffing death, where the heart stops from chemical shock, and it can happen on the first use as easily as the 100th. The come-down brings headache, nausea, and foggy exhaustion. Long-term use eats away at the brain's white matter, leaving some users with permanent damage to memory and coordination. Cheap and legal to buy, inhalants hide one of the highest immediate death risks on this list. Salvia divinorum. Salvia is a hallucinogen from a plant in the mint family, traditionally used in spiritual practice before it became a viral novelty drug. It's smoked, and the effects arrive almost violently fast. The active compound, salvinorin A, acts on kappa opioid receptors rather than serotonin receptors, which is part of why the experience feels unlike LSD or mushrooms. The onset hits within seconds, leaving little time to prepare. At the peak, lasting only a few minutes, reality can fracture completely. Users report being pulled into other places, merging with objects in the room, or losing all sense of who and where they are, often forgetting they took a drug at all. The trip collapses quickly, and the come-down arrives within 15 to 20 minutes, leaving users disoriented but back near baseline. Salvia isn't considered addictive, and most people don't return to it often, since the experience is too intense and brief to build cravings. The real risk isn't dependency. It's those few minutes of total disconnection, dangerous if someone is standing or near traffic when it hits. Kratom. Kratom comes from the leaves of a tree native to Southeast Asia, chewed for centuries by laborers seeking energy and pain relief. Today, it's sold as a powder or capsule, often marketed as a natural supplement, letting it slide into a legal gray zone. Its active compounds bind to opioid receptors, and the effect depends heavily on dose. At lower doses, kratom behaves almost like a stimulant. The onset brings energy and mild euphoria within half an hour. At higher doses, the peak shifts entirely, behaving like a traditional opioid, bringing pain relief and heavy calm. Tolerance builds quickly, pushing some users toward higher amounts just to recapture that early lift. As the come-down sets in, energy fades into lethargy, sometimes significant at high doses. Kratom sits in a strange middle ground. It's often used by people tapering off opioids, yet regular use creates its own dependency, with withdrawal symptoms like muscle aches and insomnia that mirror mild opioid withdrawal. Marketed as natural, it quietly behaves like the substances people use it to escape. Amphetamine. Prescription amphetamines like Adderall are stimulants built to treat ADHD, increasing dopamine and norepinephrine to sharpen focus. Taken as prescribed, the effects are steady. Used recreationally or at higher doses, the same chemical becomes closer to a controlled version of meth. The onset brings alertness and motivation within an hour, the mind narrowing into tunnel focus. At the peak, boring tasks become absorbing, and confidence rises along with heart rate and body temperature. For students chasing deadlines, this feels less like a high and more like a tool, which is why it's so widely misused on campuses. But the brain doesn't generate that focus for free. As the dose wears off, the comedown brings flat, irritable exhaustion, sometimes a mood crash that makes ordinary tasks feel impossible by comparison. With regular misuse, tolerance builds and sleep deteriorates, and some users find they can't concentrate at all without it. Amphetamine misuse is addictive both physically and psychologically, and over time it strains the heart and can trigger anxiety or paranoia that lingers past the dose itself. Zolpidem. Zolpidem, sold as Ambien, is a sedative built to treat insomnia, working on the same GABA receptors as benzodiazepines without technically being one. Taken as a pill at night, it's designed to act fast and clear by morning. The onset is quick, within 20 minutes, bringing heavy drowsiness and a loosening of anxious thoughts. For most people taking it as prescribed, sleep simply arrives, and that's the whole story. But at higher doses, or when someone fights the sedation instead of sleeping, Zolpidem can produce a strange waking state. Users have described vivid, sometimes hallucinatory experiences, along with behavior they have no memory of afterward, from eating to walking around the house. This blackout effect is one of the drug's most documented risks, worsened by alcohol or higher doses. The comedown means waking up groggy, with reaction time still impaired an hour or more later. With nightly use, the brain stops producing natural sleep cues on its own, and tolerance builds within weeks. Stopping suddenly after dependence can bring rebound insomnia and anxiety far worse than what the drug was meant to treat.